Hello, everyone. This is Regular Guy, and this is part 7 of my series on wheat. This is going to be the final installment of this series, and so think of this image, if you will, as a kind of self portrait. You can imagine that I'm sitting on the sofa, got James C. Scott's book there, and I'm open to the last chapter. Now, uh, not actually going to read the last chapter of the book. I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 6, but I'm mostly going to talk about like other stuff. Um, but anyway, imagine that's me. Now, imagine instead of me, that's Prince. And imagine he's reading the Bible. Okay. And imagine that it's 1982 and you're hearing these lyrics the first time. All right. Uh, so this man is talented at preserving oral tradition, isn't he? He uses song, meter, and rhyme to preserve oral traditions. Imagine being, you know, around in 1982 when that song comes on, okay? And now the idea is already planted in your head, isn't it? That the year 2000 is going to be apocalyptic. You know, uh, before 1982, who was saying that? Stanley Kubrick thought we would be talking to Martians. Whoever made this movie just a few years earlier thought that we were going to be eating cereal, smoking cigarettes, in the lower right hand corner there, and drinking beer out of standardized containers in outer space around this time. But not Prince. He's just woke up and he's reading the book of Revelations there. He's on the last chapter of the Bible there. Imagine 16, 17 years later, somebody gives you a budget to make a movie. It's 1999. Everybody's obsessed with the Y2K bug. Everybody's learning about global warming for the first time. The internet happened. People made money off it. Then a bunch of these companies went bust. And that was it. No one else had any point of reference. Soviet Union was gone. This guy somehow became respected, and you got to make a movie that's going to appeal to audiences in 1999. Now, the movies in the top left, and bottom right all have something in common. They start out strong, but then the second half is just weak. The one on the bottom right, they made a bunch of sequels. They were also weak. So they were distinguished by these sort of really captivating first half, acts, let's say. Um, and then, the bottom right, basically, after this scene where they sit down, or at least one of them sits down, that's it. It's hard, after that, it's just some action stuff. The one on the top right was made by someone who was already an old man when Prince wrote that song. Okay. Furthermore, he'd already made a movie about the year 2001, and he thought we were going to be talking to aliens. And so by 99, he would have known that wasn't, imminent. So he made this movie that's sort of an incoherent mess, no plot, doesn't have any real story, acting sucks. And then he died. And now today, for some reason, that one and the one on the bottom right are the ones that everybody's talking about. Now, for starters, nothing happened in the year 2000. Boring year. Y2K bug fizzled out. There was nothing happened. 2001, something happened, but none of these people predicted anything close to what actually happened. These people made a pretty good guess in June of 2001. The duo skilled at using song, rhyme, and meter to preserve oral traditions. They saw it was coming, but these people that grew up with the Prince lyrics and the people that got famous making movies in the 60s, They were just riding a trend. Now, the bottom right, it presents a theory that's unfalsifiable. Can't prove it wrong. Though those theories can have some staying power. Uh, there are other unfalsifiable theories like phantom time hypothesis, flat Earth theory, I suppose, a few others out there. And being unfalsifiable by itself doesn't make them bad theories. They can be useful for challenging or forcing us to go back and revisit some of our assumptions. So, phantom time hypothesis um, forces people to take a critical look at some of our history sources from the Middle Ages, let's say, or earlier. Flat Earth hypothesis, I think, is totally stupid. But if you can't disprove it using your own words, uh, better get to work on that. For that matter, if you want to prove heliocentrism, if you want to prove that the Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around, using your own words, go ahead and try. Galileo couldn't do it. In fact, no one really proved it or claimed to have proven heliocentrism until several centuries after Galileo died. The main reason that we can discard many of these unfalsifiable theories is not because we falsify them, but because they're just too complicated. They involve too many ridiculous, baseless assumptions. The reason that Galileo's model was superior was because the math was simpler. It didn't require planets to do weird, obscure, or, make these retrograde orbits or whatever. That film image in the top right, if you think that there are real people that just, come home from the office and then put on a blue gown and then go to some secret parties in Manhattan and sit in chairs and chant and then take off their masks and go home, all I can say is, why? What makes you think that's real? What makes you think people really take the time to do all that stuff? And if you didn't see that coming, maybe it's because you weren't paying attention because someone tried to bomb it in 1991 and people were talking about wanting to bomb it. And, these people here made a whole album cover out of it. And what? Hollywood didn't see that coming, I guess. And for that matter, you're going to tell me that the people who staged this scene, filmed it, directed it, wrote it, starred in it, didn't watch Beavis and Butthead? I could only find one Hollywood movie that seemed to kind of get this right. I shouldn't say right, but at least the authors of the movie had an open mind about things. This man here may as well have just seen civilization collapse. That's essentially, he mastered the use of fire, and he essentially brought about the collapse of this outpost of civilization here in the Antarctic. He has no idea what's coming next. The only thing that he has in his hand, it's kind of hard to see, but it's a bottle of distilled grain. Well, it turns out he has one other thing. He has another human being. Both of these people have, the reason they had to set everything on fire was because somebody dug into the mud, unleashed some kind of parasite, and these two were kind of trapped to some extent by their environment, and so they didn't have anywhere to flee. They just burned everything down. Now, at this stage, this man isn't smiling yet because he doesn't know. He doesn't know if he's talking to a friend or foe. He walked into the room, he had that grain, distilled grain, and the guy pops up. He's not quite sure if this one has the disease. So he offers him a drink of his distilled spirit. Guy takes a drink. This guy smiles. Credits roll. Now, who on earth would be happy at this moment? These people have no food, as far as we can tell, no water. Well, they might, they could maybe melt some ice, but they really don't have any way of making food where they are, so probably going to die. So why is he smiling? And why is that movie better than all four of these movies? Came out the same year that Prince wrote that song, you know? So, what are the odds? 1982. So that's going to be my intro to the last chapter. Not that one. Can't get this thing working right. All right. I don't know if I should leave the lyrics up there or not. Maybe they work. Okay. Scott wants us to imagine states being sort of like random Lego things that a kid puts together out of Lego blocks. Except instead of blocks, imagine that they're like little modules, like self contained modules that have little Lego pieces in them, up to like, I don't know, 30 or something. I don't know. So there's like a little Lego kit where there's some people who know how to cut stone. Maybe there's a Lego kit where it's just a certain tribe, a Lego kit where it's people who belong to a certain religion, a Lego kit where it's people who used to live on a certain patch of land and got transported to this patch of land. So the kid's trying to stick them all together and create a government. And then Scott says, yeah, of course it falls apart. What do you think? All right. Says we have hundreds of these all over the Middle East. We found the remains of these, whatever you want to call them, states or whatever. Outbreaks of Gilgamesh, let's say, okay, that just flamed out. No, that's not that's not falsifiable. We can't prove that that's what happened, but on some level, it makes more sense than people like smoking cigarettes and drinking beer in space, eating cereal in space, standardized bowls, going out there to mine some rare minerals or something that they can't get back in their sedentary wheat growing community because doesn't exist in the mud. They have to go find some other mud. Scott's at least got a more nuanced view of how things might actually play out. Okay, the chances that this is going to happen pretty slim. And again, this guy, I mean, why does he have a job? What is his job? What does he even do? He's not a professor. Like what? Who pays his salary? Why? The guy sitting in this chair here has no idea why he's right now telling this other person who's not chosen not to sit down for the moment. He's trying to explain everything to him, but the one thing he can't tell him is why civilization collapsed. James C. Scott is saying that it's a miracle any of them survived long enough to develop writing and leave any record of themselves. Scott also doesn't play word games. He says, when I say collapse, I mean collapse. All right? Everything gone. Buildings destroyed. Literacy gone. Religion's gone. Specialist crafts gone. Everything. He says here at the bottom that doesn't necessarily mean a decline in human health, well-being, or nutrition, and in fact may represent an improvement. An improvement. This man may yet be vindicated. No one tried to abuse us with sequels to this movie where we were bombarded with, this man doing stunt kicks and whatever. I bet if you interviewed the people who made that movie and you said, why'd you end it that way? Why'd you have the guy smile? They probably can't remember. Probably improvised. Actor probably can't remember. He's probably laughing about something else. Probably an outtake and they just left it in. They didn't have James C. Scott to help guide them, Say what you want about him. Nutty as he may be, whacked out of his mind as he may be. He's about to make a lot more sense than whoever thought to make this movie or whatever, be involved in any of this. Reality is in many ways more banal and more disturbing than this sedentist garbage. These people aren't even sitting down. The reason those kinds of images have staying power, Scott says, because of this stuff got on the screen here. Before, Harrison Ford portrayed a robot that eats wheat. He portrayed a guy with a whip, university professor who takes sabbaticals to the Middle East, where he kills and beats people and digs up artifacts. He does this to keep the artifacts out of the hands of elites who are obsessed with those artifacts because they want to use them to, symbolize their own power. They draw inspiration from them somehow. God is saying you may as well just dress yourself up in a dead dog carcass, because all these are the remains of the handful of civilizations that didn't burn out. They didn't burn out too fast. They lasted long enough that they could get writing and stoneworking going for a time. But then they burned out anyway, right? Even if you think the pyramids and the Sphinx and all that stuff are great, you want to put them on your dollar bill and all that kind of stuff and make a big deal out of them, fine. Those are all built, within a really narrow slice of time relative to the overall length of time that some sort of kingdom existed in Egypt, right? It's like a period of 100 years or something, all that, most of that stuff got built. So anybody who thinks they're learning the secrets of ancient Egypt, they're learning the secrets of like 4 or 5 generations of craftsmen. That's it. Okay. For the next however many thousand years, no one in Egypt knew how to build those pyramids any better than you do. And all your Templar math and all that, Isaac Newton looked into that stuff. He thought it was junk too. It's garbage. Go read Umberto Eco. It's nothing. James C. Scott says that he is particularly grateful for the increasingly large fraction of archaeologists whose attention was focused not on the apex, but on the base and its constituent units. Not that stuff. They weren't focused on that. They're focused on these kinds of people. The archaeologists are trying to find out what happened to these people. And it's probably not a bad idea because, as we saw earlier, the human population on Earth kept growing. Okay. All these states and all this crap is falling apart. Scott thinks these modules, units of a larger aggregation, generally independent but detachable, thinks states are nearly decomposable. Right. There are long periods where sedentism itself seemed to kind of fade into the background. This period that he identifies here, 1800 to 700 BC, was during the time when the population grew from 25 million to 170 million. Now, it's totally speculative why any of this happened. Okay, Scott admits later it's total speculation, all right? He gets a little too speculative here, which is why I'm not going to dwell too much longer on the book. But, here in light blue, pick some mix, you know, whatever. That can all happen. Sedentism itself really arises again only in these limited circumstances, limited ecological niches, circumstances, okay, where it can thrive. Now, James C. Scott, if you would ask me, what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear that name? I would have said at any given time, Marxist. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it in a descriptive way, just Marxist. I still haven't changed my mind. He still thinks that all these elites are dependent on these subjects to support them. Okay. Doesn't think that the subjects are dependent on the state to feed them. I don't care if he's right or wrong about that. Um, he's right that states tend to rely heavily on the population that's located close to you might call it the grain core, but whatever's generating money, golden eggs, whatever it is that Gilgamesh wants. Okay, that Gilgamesh is dependent on that population to keep producing that stuff, and if the population can't do it, Gilgamesh isn't going to thrive. And so now we got early state morbidity, acute and chronic. Again, Scott can only speculate. He doesn't have a whole lot more to say than this happens a lot. This happens all the time. Says down here it's speculative. Put it in dark blue. Footnotes kind of seem to vanish around this part of the book, and that's, But it's interesting to see what he says about disease, I think. It was written in 2017, so it was written a while ago. He had no idea what was going to happen, the next few years. And we may have learned things in the last few years that undermine some of the, I don't know, the science or whatever, the beliefs that James C. Scott brings to the table when he talks about disease here. Okay, let's see. James C. Scott thinks that this was probably the number one reason why these kind of state agglomeration things, these Lego things built by these 5-year-old kids, the reason why they fell apart. Scott says that, people living back in this time, they had no idea what the hell caused disease, really. They didn't have microscopes. They, just had no concept of biology, really, as we know it. But Scott says they understood there to be a connection between disease and two things, trade and warfare. Trade and warfare. I put this stuff in dark blue, because, again, no footnotes. It's really interesting stuff, or would be interesting if I could look it up and determine what the hell James C. Scott was reading when he drew these conclusions. For that matter, when James C. Scott says there's nothing like warfare for the mass movement and relocation of populations, I don't know if I agree with them. Put warfare up against LA International Airport. Put warfare up against the mass migration of economic refugees across a country's border. The thing is, we didn't do that. When we had our most recent epidemic, we kept the airports going, kept the flights going. And I think that's kind of odd because Scott says down here that people seem to have this idea going back to ancient history before anyone kept records that quarantine was important. Isolation, quarantine. They seem to have that sense. Scott thinks people must have picked that up thousands of years ago in the past. But then Scott wasn't, writing about this stuff when, the U.S. was keeping the airports open. James C. Scott has probably flown out of LA International Airport 100 times. Maybe he flew out of San Francisco a few times. But, why didn't they close that airport? Close all the churches, close the schools, don't close the airport. So I thought that was kind of interesting, just doing that drive by. Now, the rest of the book is, again, mostly speculative. Scott wants us to imagine that there was some kind of barbarian golden age when um, this period of time when the state thing wasn't really going on, people had spread out, and there are all kinds of great things happening. All right, he wants to imagine there's this long period of time where that happened. Fine. Um, we still don't have records to tell us what happened. So that's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Okay, we can't prove that there was a barbarian golden age because barbarians, by their nature, don't build pyramids and write Bibles and whatnot. This stuff about modularity, I think it's worth thinking about. Earlier Scott mentioned that for 95% of the time humans were on Earth, they were organized by family, lineage, band, or tribe. And it's not that hard to imagine people forming modules in the modern era. And it's not too hard to imagine some of those modules, including people who say, this sucks. People who aren't sitting down, they know how to use a remote, drink beer, but listen, turn off that movie. Don't waste another brain cell thinking about that robot eating noodles. Forget about smoking cigarettes in space like that guy standing in the back left. Forget punching yourself in the face for no reason. Forget all this garbage unless you're Joe Rogan getting paid $500 million a year to act stupid. Be responsible with fire. And forget about AI taking your job. Ask the AI to write the sequel to this movie. See if it does a better job than James C. Scott. Or ask an AI to summarize any book by James C. Scott and see if it does a better job than me. Anyway, I'm the regular guy signing off.